It's time to introduce my guest this week. Joining me on the program is Catherine Austin Fitz. She's founder and president of Solari, an organization designed to help promote healthy local living economies. Her former background, she was the managing director and member of the board of directors of the Wall Street investment bank, Dillon and Reed. She was also assistant secretary of HUD under the first Bush administration, and she's also been president and founder of Hamilton Securities. She has degrees, both bachelor and an MBA from the Wharton School of Finance, and has studied Chinese at the Chinese University of Hong Kong. Catherine, we've seen a lot of information, a lot of concern on Wall Street about the mortgage markets. We've seen consumers take on more debt when it comes to taking on bigger mortgages, refinance. But this story gets much bigger than just the credit itself. I wonder if we might begin with that.
Sure. Where would you like to start?
Well, let's talk about black budgets and how the manipulation takes place in the mortgage and the financial markets.
Okay, well, let me start off with a story. When I became Assistant Secretary of Housing, I left Wall Street and went to Washington in 1989, and I walked into the FHA gym, which at the time was a $320 billion portfolio of mortgage insurance. About 80% of that was single family. So it's homes. It's, homes that Americans buy. And it's sort of broad middle class, lower middle class, and middle class. And I walked in and I said to the fellow who was supposed to be the controller, I said, I'd like to see our financial statements. So he delivered to my office, about 20 pounds of books all on the budget, and I read it twice, and I called him and I said, look, I've read this thing twice, a couple thousand pages, and I can't find out how much are we making or losing in the single-family fund. By law, the FHA commissioner has sole fiduciary responsibility to make sure that they originate about 50 to 100 billion of mortgage insurance at the time is self-sustainable. So the premiums are supposed to fund whatever the defaults and losses are. So I said, I can't find how much money we're making or losing. And he said, well, that's because it's not in the budget. And I said, well, where is it? He said, well, the accountants have that. And I said, well, where can I find them? And he said, they report to a different assistant secretary. You're not allowed to speak to them. So I was a little bit taken aback. And to make a long story short, I had raised a lot of money for the first Bush, and so I lobbied extensively, and what I got was a pair of cufflinks, and the accountants moved over to report to me. It took about 2 months, and so I finally could talk to the accountants, and they came in, and I said, well, how much are we making or losing in the single-family fund? And it turned out we were losing $11 million a day.
Wow.
Exactly. So I said, well, where, we have 10 regions and 80 field offices, where are we making or losing money? And they said, we don't know that. And I said, well, we mail out checks, we have zip codes, it's a crash emergency, go find out. And they came back 2 months later, and it turned out that we were making money in 8 regions and losing money in 2 regions. And I was also on the oversight board through the secretary of the RTC, which was the cleanup of the S&Ls, and it was very much the same pattern. It turned out that the 2 regions, one was Texas, which included Arkansas, so you had both the Bushes and the Clintons in the same region, and the second was in Colorado. And what happened, a significant part of what they called the S&L scandal and the HUD scandal was you literally had a financial fraud epidemic. It was called, some people call it Iran-Contra, but after you worked through it and learned all about it, we had a significant black budget financial operation financing black budget projects with financial fraud, whether it was through the S&Ls or HUD. And all of that could happen because you did not have transparency. And so one of the things I got passed when I worked with a group of people in the administration was a requirement that you produce audited financial statements for it turned out to be 24 agencies of government. One of the things I'd like to do is go through a little bit about that and tie it back to the mortgage bubble. And so we got, in the first Bush administration, law required that the federal government had to produce audited financial statements, which went into operation in 1995. They had about 4 years before they were required. And what happened when the first financial statements came out was essentially most agencies could not comply or produce audited financial statements. And as of today, Jim, in 2004, the federal government has yet to comply with the laws requiring audited financial statements for those 24 agencies, and then the Treasury consolidated.
And yet they always need more money, but they can't account for where the money that they have goes.
Right. In fact, in 2001, we did an estimate, and it turned out that 85% of the first Bush administration budget were going to agencies who were not in compliance with the audited financial statements, rules, and reliable financial systems. Anyway, let me fast forward to 1995 when HUD produced the first audited financial statements. They were published, and a fellow came to see me who said, look, there's been a terrible mistake. You don't understand, my family's been in business for many generations, and we've been tracking all the FHA mortgage insurance outstanding in the market since FHA went into existence in 1934. And there's a terrible mistake. The amount of outstanding FHA mortgage insurance in the markets is significantly more than is shown in these financial statements. There's a terrible, terrible mistake. Now, when the fellow came to see me, I thought he was crazy, because what he was saying was that the U.S. Treasury and the FHA were engaged in significant securities fraud. In other words, what he was saying was that there was a significant amount of FHA and Ginnie Mae securities or FHA-related securities outstanding than was shown in the financial statements. Now, that's what I've come to believe is true. In 1995, I thought the guy was nuts. What has been evidenced over the last 7 years is that there is a pattern that suggests there's very significant financial fraud in the mortgage markets, and let me tell you a little bit about why I believe that to be true. After I left the Bush administration, the Secretary of Treasury asked me to go back in as Governor of the Federal Reserve, but I discovered the Internet when I was in HUD and decided that I wanted to create my own securities firm that specialized in financial software. And I was convinced there was a tremendous opportunity to finance neighborhoods and places and securitize small business and small real estate income and finance in the equity markets. In other words, in a world of privatization, there's no reason why you can't finance a lot of municipal functions with equity. And it's a tremendous and terrific opportunity. Everybody says, well, large corporations are going to come in and finance, and privatize our water and our municipal functions. And my attitude is, hey, let's finance our own and, make money. So we wanted to do that, but a lot of it depended on creating the software tools to let you really see how the money works by place. And part of what I discovered when I was Assistant Secretary is because there's no transparency of how the money works by place for government money, there's tremendous opportunities. There's neighborhoods where, for example, HUD is spending $250,000 per unit to rehab public housing, but you can buy and rehab single family in the same, 3 or 4 block area for $50,000. So to the extent that you can re-engineer government money within a place, there's tremendous arbitrage opportunities if you combine that with financing places with equity. So we got very interested in doing that. One of the things that happened was HUD later hired the company back on competitive contract to help with $12 billion of defaulted mortgage auctions. HUD was the last, the RTC and the private financial institutions auctioned all their mortgages, but HUD was kind of the Johnny-come-lately, and so hadn't done that. And then we started to help them do that between 94, 95, 96. They auctioned successfully about $10 billion of mortgages. What happened in that process was we were able to get the recovery rates, which had traditionally been about 35 cents on the dollar, beyond the industry standard, which was about 75 cents on the dollar. We got it up to about 70 to 90 cents on the dollar. And then in 1996, we're targeted by the only way I can describe. Have you ever seen the movie Enemy of the State?
Oh, sure.
Okay, well, I have somebody who introduces me at conferences and says, this woman played Will Smith in real life. Do you remember the role that Will Smith played?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, well, what happened was we were targeted in a process where we went through a period of having 18 audits and investigations and 12 pieces of litigation. And through that whole sort of enforcement process, the honest people were pushed out of HUD. And they pushed my company and a series of other sort of honest contractors and government officials out. And what happened in the year following that is HUD failed to produce audited financial statements and reported undocumentable adjustments of $59 billion. That was in fiscal 1999. And throughout government in fiscal 99, 2000, 2001, there were reports of not only failure to produce audited financial statements, but about $3.4 trillion of undocumentable adjustments. Very, very significant. That works out to about $11,000 per American resident.
Where do all these losses get booked?
What was happening is annually, starting in 1995, the federal government, the auditors underneath the auspices of each agency's inspector general, would come forward and say,